Well, there you have it, everyone. Another year, another season of F1 wrapped up. First season with the new regulations to promote the closer racing. Did it work? We'll be talking about that in a little bit. Max produces an absolutely brilliant display of his talent to secure his second world championship. Red Bull back on top. First time since 2013 it will be. Ferrari doing Ferrari things, and we'll read your questions and comments that you sent to us as well. All that and more. My name is Michael, as always, joined by Kyle. And Kyle, first of all, welcome back. It's good to be back.
Yes.
It's been a while.
What do we call this? Season 3, Revival 3, something like that?
Yeah, I guess
Block
if we just turn it into like our seasons rather than going by the Formula 1 seasons, this is just like our season 3.
This is how the Australians do it.
Yeah,
We're all wacky here.
all backwards.
We have a hot Christmas. Whoa.
Left is right and up is back, and but it's to be honest, the reason why we're away little bit complicated. There was a lot going on. I was homeless for a bit. I had a home, but I was not at my
computerless.
Yeah. I did have a computer, but the whole setup was it was not conducive to recording and editing, and it was just sort of a difficult time for a good few months there. So, but now I'm back. We're keen to sort of get back. I really like doing all the off-season stuff. I feel like that's
how we got into it last time as well. We did
yeah.
like 1 or 2 race reviews, left the entire year, came back in, partly because it was such an exciting end last year, so we were like, we got to talk about this.
Yep.
But I think even when we had a bit of a break this year, we thought, look, we might get a race review in, but if not, as soon as we know the season ends, let's just jump back into it, get back into the horse, and maybe next year we'll make it through the whole year.
Yeah, we're getting closer.
See how we go.
We'll get a few more races in next year before we take a break.
I was going to say, it'll be more of a grind, but maybe that's a good challenge for us.
But yeah, we've got, again, like I said, we really like the off-season, so we've got so many plans for off-season videos. If you haven't seen our Twitter, also, probably the next one we're recording is we're going to look back at Sebastian Vettel's career, just sort of chat and shoot the shit about what we thought of Vettel, what Vettel meant to everyone, I guess, because it was an outstanding career. So that'll probably be our next video. Stay tuned for that.
Yep.
We've got driver team rankings. We've got an idea for like a favorite moments or a top 5. We're sort of ironing out details. We're going to be reacting to our predictions. It's going to be even worse than last time.
I actually forgot about that one already.
Yeah, so
that'll be good.
So we've got the season predictions from this year, and then our 2023 driver predictions, which is also going to be very. That's not going to.
We nailed it for sure. We're so good at this.
Yeah,
Professionals.
Possibly we'll get back into the podcast as well as more news and stuff comes through. We'll probably get back into that. Looking ahead to next season, obviously, we've got more predictions coming in for next year. That'll probably be more sort of January, February next year. But yeah, we've got so many plans for the next few months. So definitely stay tuned. We do have, I don't know if I've mentioned this on the channel yet, but we have a potential second channel in the works as well. I'll keep it a bit of a secret what it's actually going to be about. It's somewhat unrelated to the Formula 1 space, but it's something that
a work in progress
may be coming early next year. We'll see how we go. It depends on time and just a whole bunch of things. But if there's anything that anyone's listening or watching wants us to talk about in the off season, please let us know down below. We'll see if we can make a video out of it or touch on it in a later video as well. So and I mentioned our Twitter. Feel free to follow our Twitter at FinalSectorYT. That's where we've been getting majority of our comments and questions and stuff for, that we'll be answering a bit later on. So, but yeah, I guess the first question I wanted to ask you regarding this season, Kyle, is was it a good season of F1? I'm going to just go real broad. Was it good? Yes or no?
Was it good?
Yes
yeah,
or no?
It was good. I mean, that's the thing. You step back a bit, and if you were just looking at the standings, you'd go, oh my god, we're back in Mercedes season 2, except it's even worse because there's only one driver up front rather than having a potential someone to battle him. Yep. But then when you reflect on it, you go, did this really feel like a season where, maybe you could argue it, but you still rarely went into a weekend going, oh, look, unless there's a bloody miracle, Red Bull aren't going to be stopped. They're so far in front. We need it to be like freezing snow or boiling hot or something completely random to level up the playing field. even when Max is at his strongest, you still kind of went, oh, but look, this could suit this and that could suit that. We think the Mercedes here and the Ferrari there. And so you never really almost like lost hope and went, oh God, we really need like this year to end and to hope that teams have a bit of a shake up. You know, I feel like despite the dominance that we saw towards the end, you still were left with going a bit of almost like not hope, but almost just like this doesn't mean a dire thing, or you know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
And more from that perspective, it never felt kind of doomy and gloomy or like, let's get this season over with. I enjoyed every part of it, even if the battle at the tippy top wasn't there. But there's still plenty of hope, I think, for things to still be close going forward. But yeah, no reason to look back on this and think, glad that it's over.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not looking back at like that for sure, but I think it doesn't help coming off the back of maybe the 2021 season as well, where it was quite possibly the hardest fought battle.
Yes, some people call it the greatest season of all time.
One of the best
and brought a lot of
seasons,
people in. So
And then-
in contrast, you'd say, yes, it wasn't exciting as that, but in broader terms, it was still great,
Yep. No, I would agree, for sure. I want to go back sort of towards the beginning, because obviously a lot of the storylines are where a lot of the the interesting stories are, particularly up there with this sort of Red Bull Ferrari battle, where you go back to the start, and the first race was a Ferrari 1-2 at Bahrain with both Red Bulls out, both with I think it was both fuel pump issues, or was like power unit.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was to do with a pump or something.
Yeah.
They were just like, we didn't expect this at all. We don't know what this is.
Yeah, and then they had one of the AlphaTauris, I think, went out with a power unit issue as well, and we're just like, oh, Red Bull are fast, but there's reliability could be a big issue, and we're like, oh, Ferrari could run away with this early on. And how the
little did we know that reliability would still be a big issue for F1, but it would move its hand across the field in malicious, devilish ways as the season went on.
Yeah, definitely. It's a shame we didn't get, because again, the early season it was very obvious it was sort of shaping up to be, again, a Max v Lewis, but Max v Leclerc, because it was them two just so far out ahead of everyone else. But they were always like within a second or two on the track. It doesn't matter what they did.
We were treated to early on to some
and
shots of what we said, this is the future now,
Yeah, exactly. So it was just a bit of a shame we didn't get that more towards the end, as Ferrari started to fall back, and like I said, they had their reliability issues and their strategy calls and general...
And just Red Bull themselves just getting everything together, and Ferrari not able to match that consistency. Yeah,
they just sort of leaps and bounds ahead of Ferrari in the end. And Ferrari, I think I might have, again, I don't know if I said this in a video because it's been like 6 months since we recorded, but I was worried that Ferrari were going to drop back into the clutches of Mercedes, like they were going to drop back to third, which it did end up being very close in the end. But yeah, you look at the points difference, and they were like 200 points, I think, behind Red Bull. And if you said that, the first 3 or 4 races, you'd be like, there's no way. It's no way. It's way closer than that. But it turns out it wasn't. How do you reflect on that? I guess maybe even going into next year, do you think it's a good sign, bad sign? What are your thoughts on maybe that battle going forward?
Well, I think it still leaves a lot on the table, right? Like, we kind of got a lot of teasers, and we almost got a few battles that could have been this year. But again, I don't feel like you go into next year thinking that, Red Bull are the kings. I mean, I guess part of it is part of what the rules are going to do, and part of a few other drama that happened meant that, the other teams will get actually quite a big benefit now to catch up if they are behind in terms of the area development, wind tunnel time and all that, with Red Bull getting penalized and being first, so they get even less than the others on that regard, and that would take a bit to play out, of course. But I think even without that, even just the last, again, you look at the last few races, and I think just Red Bull and Max were just so with it, and they just seemed to be able to just put the car out there in the perfect setup and go. And I mean, even the last few races, often going into the weekend, and I even remember, unsurprisingly, most recently from Abu Dhabi, and kind of Ferrari coming in saying, "Oh God, we're really struggling to set up the car," and yet Leclerc had a pretty good final race and was able to deal with tyres in a car that everyone up to that point was saying this car's shocking on its tyres. So it almost just went, hey, everyone in Mercedes, having that the good result with George as well. So it's almost like towards the end they've gone, by the way, this is a bit of a tease that we know we're there, and then of course we got all the variables where we don't know when teams switch to development next year, and of course the team leaders, especially Ferrari, saying, oh, we switched pretty early when we realized it was doom and gloom, and you start seeing again going, well, Red Bull must have been developing towards the end again. Does that mean they're going to slip back just like Mercedes did? And then we all have this question mark over Mercedes. Are they going to evolve their car, bring a brand new car? We know that they're hungry, thirsty, they probably switched ages ago. So I think even though it's still early to talk about next year, I think the drivers that we've got, signed up and the stories and everything, and it being one of the longest season we've ever had.
Yep.
I'm already frothing for. I already want more. I want more of this current season, but I think next season is going to be just as good. And we've only talked about the top few teams, of course, but everything, all the lower teams driver moves. Yep. It's great.
Yeah.
But
Definitely.
Yeah.
Before we talk about the lower teams, just keeping on the top three teams, I guess. One of the best stories for me was that Mercedes, because the Mercedes, again, some validation for me, because I think with one of my predictions, it's one of the ones I remember I did say that one of those two teams would drop back. I think I predicted Red Bull. It ended up being Mercedes, so half win. But they did drop back, but fucking full credit to them. They fought their way back. There was a very good chance they could have ended that year without a win to their name, but Brazil showed that if they get, that car has a lot of potential, and if it's in the right window, man, they're just quick, and they were the quickest on pace. It almost seemed like by a long way, and like Red Bull were third fastest and Ferrari were second. So, which you would have been completely swapped if it was the race before or a couple of races ago. So, I think you're right in saying that at start of next year, if things sort of keep progressing in that same way, at least for the top three teams, it very well could be that three-way fight that we kind of hoped for this year. But we'll have to see. But yeah, I think it was a pretty good season. But I think most of the excitement, I think, came more down the field again. Again, that midfield, which is now, I think this is something that you predicted, that the midfield there wouldn't be as much of a back marker.
You wouldn't go in thinking, this team is the definite back marker again. It'll be a miracle if they get out. It did. I mean, we do with a Discord community, we do a predictions league basically, and often the question is which two drivers are going to get knocked out of the first qualifying session. Outside of generally we excused Latifi, right? But even that Latifi question, after I think going, I know. But even thinking that question, it's hard because you think, well, do you go with someone like Albon, but then he often goes up there, but then you go, but then Mick, but he gets there, and then you start going, Ricardo? Am I really saying that? Then you go, Sonoda, but sometimes he's like, it's
and what
hard.
About the Haas, but then sometimes they can just be like 5th and 6th.
I know.
For some
sometimes
reason.
They're in P1. It's like, what the heck?
Yeah, true.
So I think, credit to the fact that the midfield's bunched up, but I think one of, depending how you wanted to run this, I think when I was thinking about my kind of favorite moments or top things I would say is the fact that these regs seem to have brought things together. I think even on races where Verstappen was out in front, we had so many races in the past where he was out front and the rest of the field was just stagnant. I can only think of like one, maybe two races this year that were really stagnant. I think it was like Mexico and Australia were maybe the most two that were stagnant, and all the others still had at least a little more fighting than I can remember in recent memory. We kind of had, I remember so many times in the past where there's this picture of, it's essentially a shot of one of the billboards in Hungary, and it's supposed to be when the race is at the end, and it's got Lewis in P1 got his finger out. But instead of it saying Lewis, it's got a tag saying this race was shit. And I remember after every race in the past, people would always just post that on Twitter going, race review, this race. And I remember after Mexico, people saying, let's get the dust off this picture, because it was actually pretty shit. Yeah. But that was... I felt like there was very few where we really went, oh, bother, I just wasted my time a bit with this. I could have waited, not stayed up all night watching it.
Yeah.
Even on races where Max was so ahead, and even on tracks that have historically been a bit of a snore fest. So I think credit to that. In general, kudos to the regs, easy to overlook. But, I mean, we say, hey, tweak the DRS a bit here, change a corner there, and hey, we could have some bloody magic here.
Yep.
So I think that helped as well, even when the top was,
Definitely, yeah.
Max was out in front of someone else. There was still a lot of else going on in strategy for second, third, fourth in the midfield. Guys coming through on fresh tyres, guys falling back on old tyres. Someone like Albon fighting off a P8 or De Vries. All of that stuff is always a storyline, and far more than in recent. You think back the past 10 years, you'd still rank this. Maybe some bias, but it could be like the second or third best season we've had in a while, easily in the grand scheme of things. So
yeah, hard to argue. I think you touched on something that the closer field spread, I think, is very, very promising, like you say, because strategy plays it's still one of the most exciting things in a race is the strategy, and I feel like there seem to be a lot more sort of two-stop strategies. Like in previous years, it was
that
like
as well.
The one stop is outside of a couple of high deg tracks. It's like one stop is king, and if you go two stop, then you have
big
to
risk or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. But I feel like there was just a lot more pit stops, which is and because
and
the
a lot of
closer,
times where the one stop was almost seen as the risky. We went, one stop, that's risky. When before it was like, one stop.
Yeah, yeah. So. And that just sort of made things a bit more interesting, anytime there's, more than one pit stop for a strategy, when a field is close together, it gets teams and drivers and, everyone thinking, it's like, what is the best strategy? And like, particularly if there's rain around or, it's a wet to dry race, it's like, when do I go onto the right tire? And all this, it's all part of it. And it just feels like this season had a lot more of it than previous seasons have.
Yes.
I do agree that I think the DRS is probably still a little too strong, given now they can. Well, at least they've proven now that they can run closer together. They probably
I
didn't
think that
know
was
that.
something they said earlier. I think it was something they said earlier in the year. They said, "Look, we're not going to drop it off because we prefer to be over safe with it, rather than drop it back and then suddenly no one can pass it all." We go, well, obviously we still need this.
Yeah.
And I think that was proved in full force. So
definitely a little bit of tweaking. I would say either change some regulations with how the DRS wing works, they don't get quite as much top speed, or just tweak the actual DRS zones themselves. The activation zones, I think, this is still a little bit of tweaking to do with that, specifically with did they ever end up tweaking it, or they say they're tweaking it for Saudi Arabia, although that provided the great Max and Charles thing, where they both locked up coming into the front.
Yeah, that was another one I had noticed saying.
It was kind of a little farcical. It's just like everyone knows. It's like it was similar in Abu Dhabi as well, where it's like they didn't overtake down that back straight because you just get overtaken on the second one as well. They're coming out of the chicane immediately after. So
We've seen
I think
it in Canada in the past too, when the Canada zone was really big on the back straight, same thing, and they had to tweak that.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously it can be done, but it's minor things, I definitely think these new regulations are 100% going in the right direction. The one thing I would like to see, I saw this quote from, I really rate Jolyon Palmer. I don't know if I've said this, but I rate him as an analyst, and just the way he speaks he's very good. But it's something that I didn't even realize until the end of the season. He was talking about, last year we had, was it 7 teams on the podium? I think it was. And we had, outside the 3 teams, we had Norris on the podium in Imola, and that was it. And we had no one else. And it's like, I kind of just wish there was a little less of a gap to those front 3 teams. And I'm kind of hoping next year that kind of closes up a bit. And then we have, we have some of these teams that, like you have a Norris on there a little bit more regularly, or you have, when Haas is really strong, they can sort of sneak onto the podium, or, have I'm surprised Alpine never got a podium. They were pretty consistently, quick.
Well, when they were on their day, they were really on their day,
Again, they were plagued by some reliability.
Yeah, part of it, which if you think about to some performances from many of the top drivers, I suppose, is that, if you have cars where it's really, really hard to pass, we've seen in the past few years, it was known that if the Mercedes started back down the field, despite it being like a bullet, it couldn't move through the field because it was so bad in dirty air. When the Red Bull was known to be good. And yet we saw many races where a lot of the top drivers were starting near the back this year, and yet they were able to get through to the front. And you wonder if because because they've reduced that dirty air in that, it's easier for them to move through the pack, and therefore it's harder for those guys, if they do get lucky starting near the front, to hold everyone back or for them to make through. Like, how many times have we seen Max start halfway through, and even on some tricky passes to overtake in that, tracks to overtake on rather, he still found it pretty easy.
Was it Hungary he came from like outside the top 10 to P1, I think it was?
There was 2 races. I think it was Hungary and did he do it in Zandvoort, or did he start? I feel like Zandvoort was one he had.
He wouldn't have started that far back at Zandvoort.
I feel like maybe I was thinking of the year before. Anyway, but the more point is that even when the Ferrari drivers dropped back and there was a crash early on, or even the Mercedes drivers, they still found a way to get back up.
Yeah.
So even though we occasionally saw like an Alpine or someone up in P3 or P4, again, I think, you know, if we had the older regs, then maybe they would have stayed there because everyone's managing a lot more and it's a 1-stop, so people are pushing less and that.
Yeah.
But then in this, sometimes, you know, people just go to a 3-stop just to dice through the field because that was the quickest way and the easiest way to get through cars. So I do agree that it now seems you need to be even luckier, and it would be nice to close the gap a bit more, but if the cause of it is because it's, you know, nice to overtake and we get a lot more midfield battles and a generally more exciting race, then you kind of take a step back, and I think, you know, maybe you take a bit with the other, even if in general you want to see the performance, you know, gapped a bit. But look, if there's 3 teams fighting at the top that are ahead of everyone else, well, then we'll take that anyway. It's better than 1 team or 2 teams, you know. So we'll less feel bad about going, oh, it's the same bloody 6 drivers. We go, hey, if it's 6 drivers rotating the podium, I'll take it, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially like you say, if it is like all 6 are in with the shot of a win at any race or at any opportunity. So, I think that's probably more what I would be leaning towards, is like at least have those 3 close up, have the midfield close up even more, because we still had, even though you said we didn't have like a true like back marker, I think Williams are probably the closest by the end of the season. Yeah. They were pretty consistently down the order, unfortunately, and I think it took, while they did end up getting a couple of points, it usually was because of some outrageous strategy. Like I think, what was the one where Albon, was it Australia, where he pitted like literally on the last lap?
He pitted the last lap.
Yeah, and ended up getting the P10, like a stupid, outrageous strategy that just happens to come off.
Yep. Or just when they were really lucky on their day, like at Monza, which, you know, they were impressive on.
Yeah. So I think that there is still room for a couple of those teams to come through. We did see Aston, they started real bad. Like they were, I would say, probably the worst team for the first 4 or 5 races.
I think they were one of the worst for the hype that was put behind them.
Yeah,
like when we had a bit of hype behind Williams, but then when they were there, you went, fair enough. Yeah. But Aston, you know, they're probably like, are they the new P3, P4, you know, in the constructors? And then they really were a bit, you know. But they did come into their own in the end. I'm sure more appropriate for a Vettel video, but another thing I mentioned was it was actually good to see him getting back out there again, you know, before he didn't just fizzle out in the background like a candle.
Yeah.
Last few races was able to actually get something together with the team, and I think all that's done is just brought a lot of hope for Alonso. I mean, the thing that just happened, which was the final little test they had, Alonso was saying, oh, I love it, this is amazing, this car's great, I'm so excited for the future, and I'm sure he's just hyping it up. But that little bump in performance would have also, you know, egged him on a bit.
It definitely seems like, I think they have a lot to improve in terms of their quali pace, because it still seems they're way off there. But we saw both from Vettel and Stroll, when Stroll wasn't crashing into people or crashing into walls or making kind of silly errors.
Things,
yeah, doing typical Stroll things. They had really good race pace. Like they were. You would not be surprised to see them in the top 10 during the race.
They were just making good passes.
Steady. Yeah. So I think there is promise there, but they obviously a lot of things to improve. But considering where they were at the start of the season, I think that's again very, very promising, especially for a driver of Alonso's caliber and how he's racing at the moment. He still seems to be at his peak, or at least close to his peak. He seems to be racing really well. So,
and I think as well, I feel like the balance is almost there with all those midfield teams where both a driver who's really on their day can kind of outshine a bit. Like there's few teams, like you could even argue the Williams, but even then, you know, when Albon was really on his day, he seemed to just be able to actually just, you know, put in a nice performance that wasn't necessarily through luck and such. Especially when you look at some races where he finished compared to his teammate, even though, you know, they were on comparable strategy, for example, it wasn't, Albon got handed the gold spoon and Latifi got handed, a piece of dirt or something that,
Here you go, Latifi. Your going away present. It's a piece of dirt.
Here's some wets in the dry. No, there's none of that. But more to the point that I think in almost all those teams, it was not only just the driver that could shine, but because of a lot of the weather that we had, and the tire strategies and such, is that the strategists really on their day. Like I probably saw more commendations for strategists on Twitter than I ever had before in a certain season because it was that close. And in development and car setup and everything, and the engineers, I think it's really on them that a little tweak or thing you could make could pull you to, P4 in the race versus P17 so easily, I mean, we saw at the end, sometimes Alonso was up there in P4 and then you watch the previous race replay and he's like P19 dawdling around with no pace. And I think just with the cost cap and everything, they're almost, a lot of them now are in that same bubble, and it's really up to the people and the drivers to really shine on their day, and they have to actually properly work for it rather than going, well, even if we smash this out, we're going to get a P11 maybe best of the day. It's going to take us 6 years for our upgrade, 6 races rather
6
for our
years,
upgrade.
Wow. Just,
and rather than just saying, 6 races, we have our upgrade, then we might be able to fight for points. You didn't hear that a lot at all. They were kind of like, no, on our day, we can get up there. And I mean, you started with, at the start of the year, with Alfa and Bottas up there, and then at the end you saw where they were, and even Haas up there, and then
that was the next point. Is I literally had in the same point, Haas and Alfa were both super quick, like
off the gates.
doors,
they seem to just smash it, which again, credit to them. But then other teams, like in comparison, you look at McLaren, they started right at the back. We're like, oh my god, they're gonna be ninth in the constructors, and then they flipped it around in comparison, due to their efforts and everything. So. I think what the new regs have done and what the cost cap and all that has done, yes, we could still like a bit of a closer gap between what we call the front and the midfield, I suppose, but I think it really rewards those midfield teams that are really optimizing and are smashing it out of the park, and they actually get rewarded for it rather than going, oh, we did amazing, we got P11. You almost see a reward now every time when a team thinks they've done a really good job or a driver's done a really good job, and I think that's excellent to see as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, actually, because, normally when a team or a driver, even if they are maybe low on pace, when everything's gone right, usually you will see them in the points, so it's not like,
and higher up the points too. It's not like, oh, they get a P10, Again, maybe you could put Williams in that bucket, but even then, some weekends they did just look really comfortable. You went, like a P, P7, 8, good job. It wasn't just, oh, they got so lucky.
Yeah, exactly. So, I guess the only other team I didn't really touch on was AlphaTauri, but I would almost put them in the same sort of category as Haas and Alpha, because I was looking at like a lot of their early races. I was just going through the race highlights. By the way, side note, I feel like the season is too long now. I feel like it's too many races, because I got to like the last 5 or 6 races and I just stopped watching 3 practice sessions because I'm like, I just can't. It's just too much now. I feel like 20 is like the max for my stupid short-term brain. Like, I can't even remember the stuff that happened earlier in the year.
Well, to follow it hardcore, right? As you're saying, you can only kind of drill in and follow it all so close before you start to just burn out a bit.
Yeah, but I kind of want to be able to pay attention to all of it. But I have to admit that the last 4 races, I was like, I'll just watch quali like the day after and the race the day after, and there we go, we're done. Oh, cool. I don't know. Maybe it's because Max had already won by that point, and there was less incentive to watch for.
It takes a little bit of that excitement.
Also, American races that are at 4 a.m. It's like, I just don't want to. But anyway, back to my point. AlphaTauri, obviously, they sort of looked really promising early on as well. Like, every time I'd watch a race highlight, they're starting like 7th and 8th, or 7th and 9th, or 6th and 7th sometimes. Like, they were always up there the first few races, and then by the end they're 9th out of 10th in the constructors, and you're like, how did that happen?
I know. I think when I was listening to the BBC breakdown the other day, and they were talking about AlphaTauri, and they're gonna try again next year, I guess. I went, oh yeah, they were out there because they weren't really involved in like a battle. It's not like we said, and the battle for 9th and 10th is really close, or 9th and 8th. It was Alpine versus McLaren for a few races, and it was Mercedes, Red Bull, and Ferrari, and it was Aston Martin and Alfa Romeo. And then you kind of just forgot. You're like, AlphaTauri is somewhere in there. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
The drivers are somewhere in there. They're not, really being a break point. So
real weird.
And again, I think a team that in the past, sometimes we've given them commendations that their cars haven't been the best, but their drivers and team have just hooked up some weekends. And it seems when other teams have managed to do so, they just haven't. They've almost lost that spark, that ability to, find those weekends where they can really smash it out. Not because you'd say, oh, their car's just a bit poor. I'm not sitting here saying I think they've just dropped off the performance. I think, again, you just really got to be on it, and you got to have the right people on it at the right time making the good calls. And you just didn't. I don't remember a good call from them for a little bit, to be honest. And that's probably why they're down there, which is a bit sad to see. But then you feel less because they've dropped and more because the others have just done really well,
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, maybe that's all it is. But yeah, we'll look to next year again. It could sort of change around. Depends on, like you say, if teams decide they want to change their car design a bit now that they've got a little bit more time. If they've seen things, maybe they want to.
Exactly. There's a top three teams again, three different designs, which should be another pretty big point to talk about. And there's a big thing going: are they going to change? Who are the younger teams going to borrow from? It's going to be a spicy winter, which is good.
Yeah, definitely. I guess the couple of other points I wanted to touch on before we go into like questions and comments from people. Russell outscoring Hamilton in his first year at Mercedes. Obviously, it's not the Mercedes of old, which is possibly why George maybe he was so strong in the first part of the first half of the year compared to Hamilton.
Very consistent.
I think how many did he have? Out of the first 15 out of 16 of the first races, outside of the one where he was in the crash in Britain, he was in the top 5. Like he was just always there picking up the scraps, as it were. Every single time he was just consistently getting points all the way through, whereas Hamilton was obviously struggling, with the car for whatever reason. He started to come back, obviously, back half of the season, and I would say that they're probably about even on pace now, given what I saw in Brazil.
Yeah, I think in raw pace, Hamilton, you'd still in his day, will probably be a tiny bit ahead.
Yeah.
I think you only really see that when he's fighting for the top, like when he's in a championship battle. Well, he was probably, you always felt like he was conserving a little bit. And especially in Brazil, they let them race, but you feel like Hamilton wasn't like, oh, I've got to get this bloody guy out the way. And even afterwards, immediately, he's like, this is a brilliant result. I couldn't be happier, whether it's me or George up there. I could not care less, right? Yeah. He was happy just for the both of them.
That's it, yeah.
And a great mindset for him to have. And obviously, they're obviously realizing, look, we know this isn't where we want to be, but there's no point dilly-dallying about it. Let's secure what we can and then make sure we're in a rock-solid state going into next year. So if they can attack it, they're on the best of terms they can be and with it as much as they can.
Yeah, 100%.
And it was surprising when Hamilton retired and they were like, oh, this is the first retirement, I think, since the year before or something. I was like, oh my God, what? Yeah. After a year we talked about retirements and drama and Red Bull and then Ferrari, and then it's like, this is the...
First mechanical failure, yeah. That's which is unbelievable.
It's probably a further credit to the fact of how they, despite being so off the pace early, that they nearly, beat Ferrari. Yeah. Really, they were that close. Yeah. And that just goes to show. Look, it's not all about what am I trying to say? Out and out speed is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
There are other factors and how reliability and all that you don't think about can actually mean a lot. If they kicked out the gates a little bit stronger, they would have actually maybe crushed Ferrari in the end and been a strong P2.
Well, that's the thing. They talk about it in like F2 and F3 constantly. Like the commentators are always talking about it when it comes down to points, is that consistency is key. Like you can go a long time without winning races, but as long as you're up there and you consistently scoring good points, you'll probably win the championship. It obviously helps to win a lot, but the consistent point scoring is what gets you close to the top or at the top.
Yeah.
It's a slightly different point scoring. Obviously, they've got more points for the sprint.
Different weekend format than that.
Yeah. So it's slightly different in that respect. Obviously, the reverse grid for the sprint.
But still, when they take... the idea is they take most of the other variables out that other teams would have, so it's more just about consistency. And you see it, again, from Mercedes, and even that's how someone like Norris still consistently gets so far up on points in that midfield is... you remember like when the Alonso got up there in P5, when the Vettel got up there, and yes, Norris had the podium, but outside of that, it seems like it's more just expected that he's up there getting consistent places just because that's what he does, and that's why he's so highly revered. And then you look at the standings, you go, oh my God, he's so high up ahead of the rest of that midfield because he's just consistently P7, P6,
just always
just
there.
whacking in the good results, and that's better than, a P5 and the rest of P15. Well, you had your P5, great, but you're still 13th in the championship. So it's a season, and also going to next year, longest season we've had, it'll be even more important. It should play to Mercedes and drivers like Norris's strengths.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, let's get into some questions, unless you had anything else you wanted to talk about in particular. So we've got some questions and comments from from a few people. We're just going to go through them to sort of discuss, and if we've already talked about them, we'll just go into a bit more detail, I guess. So I've got this one from Michaela on Twitter. Says, Michael and Kyle, what has been your biggest disappointment or disappointments of the year? And on the opposite end, what were your favourite moments of the season? Favourite moments of the season, just to touch on the second part, like I said, we're probably going to do a separate video for that sort of thing. So we won't touch on that one. Stay tuned for a later video. We'll go into much more depth. But biggest disappointment of the season, what are you thinking of? What comes to mind?
Well, again, there wasn't anything big that really rung out. Like, you could say the red herring is there wasn't a championship title fight, but then I didn't really mind about that. I mean, maybe a big disappointment for me personally was the fact that I think Checo really threw away what should have been a really free P2 in the title. I think he showed such highs that if, again, he had that consistent throughout the year, it should have been free, and yet he was a bit up and down. And yes, he had some cool ups, and that's what got him his contract and that, and, put the spotlight on him. But he had some pretty mediocre downs as well that he shouldn't have had. And I think that was no more clear than in Abu Dhabi when, he was going off that the back markers were in his way and he was on a bad strategy. But he made plenty of mistakes in that race. And when he didn't get there at the end, I went, look, if he didn't make those mistakes, he would have had it. And that kind of summed it up, that he's quick and he's good at doing a move here and there and a good lunge and a good defend. But overall, it's, and of course I'm biased because I'm a big fan of him, but that was still a bit of a disappointment. I went, God, like, just
wish
got
it was
that
just
P2
a little bit more,
and Red Bull historically had never had a P1-2 in the Drivers' Championship either, and that would have been good to say it was Checo that did it. And yes, the team's still going, he's still fine, he did his job, but still it was like if you just went that bit over the line, I feel like you're just going to next year with a bit more of a boost and more of the public behind you. But now there's still going to be, I've already heard on podcasts the comments going and saying, oh, Checo did well, but would Gasly have done better? Would I would have done better? Which is totally valid. If you still got the P2, I feel like you'd hear less of that.
Yeah, true. Yeah, that's fair.
I feel like that's one I'd bring up because it's more close to home to me. I mean, I have a few other smaller ones, but I'll let you take the stage anyway.
I mean, I've got a couple. One is just generally the FIA and the race control crap throughout the season.
That, but yes,
I just can't. With
after
some
the
of their
biggest
decisions.
flop up of all time last year, and we thought, right, they're gonna.
Yeah,
we probably said in our season review, we're gonna see how they're gonna take up the rule book. They're gonna bring new people in, restructure it, tear it up, rewrite everything, new policies, and yet even into the last race, we're still like, what's the FIA going to do today? Let's roll the numbers. Oh, they're going to penalise track limits only on turn 2.
Yeah.
They're going to change it to 1 warning. They'll change it back to 5 for the race.
It's just, everyone's obviously been complaining. Most of the drivers by the end of the season have just complained that there's just no consistency. They ended up dropping the rotating race director by the end of the year after the fucking, was it Japan, the Suzuka one with that was the big decision to put so they got
multiple decisions, mind you, not just the one, but there was the big one which made you go, dear Lord, where are we going?
Yep, that's good. It's real good. But like just generally being like slow with like every decision, decisions to bring safety cars in. What was the one? It was a recent race. It must have been Abu Dhabi where they were just taking forever to unlap the cars. And it's like everything's clear and we've just gone around another lap, but the sign hasn't come up for cars to unlap themselves yet.
Yeah,
and it's like, why? Why is it not up yet? Let them unlap themselves.
They also had some sort of automated system they were relying on for the unlapping, which meant no one bothered to check Yuki and to say, hey, you can unlap yourself too. They just looked at the boards and went, oh, the board says no one, go.
Yep.
If someone looked out, they would have gone, oh, there's a car in the middle of the field there as well. Let's override that.
I just don't. I don't get it, man. What was the race where they just took forever to enable DRS as well? When it was like every driver was on dry tires. It was like a wet to dry race, and it just took them like 15 laps to enable DRS, and then all of a sudden it's like DRS isn't. It was like,
and it stalled out a
awesome.
few big battles, and
Fantastic. Was it Imola? It might have been Imola. Because it's notoriously pretty hard to overtake there, right? And that's why it was like it just sort of become a procession.
And it's generally a bit wet there too.
Yeah. And it's just like, man, it just took so long, and no one had any answers. There's no communication to anyone about why they do these things. The Monaco delayed start because of the threat of rain, and it's like it's not even raining, but it's like the threat of rain is like, we're just gonna delay it. Awesome. Cool.
Yes,
why?
I remember that. If you want to see, your opinion on that, go back to our review. You went into detail about all of the calls they made. I remember you got all the timestamps, all the confusion, the mess, and you littered it out in detail. And I was like properly educated into how much of a farce that was.
Yeah. And then even more recently at Brazil, the new rules that they've introduced, which was obviously due to last year, with like the contact in the corner, the Max Lewis one at Brazil that happened this year, and they gave Max a penalty for it, and I was like, that's racing incident. That just looks like racing incident, but it's like, you were like, no, according to the new rules, according to the book, it is a penalty, and I'm just like, that's wrong. I was validated when I started looking at everyone else talking about it, and they're like, yeah, that's wrong. That's the grey area that we need. That one can't be black and white because these incidents are so varying and different.
I've said this before. Although people, you can never apply a flat out rule or a computer to look at these things and analyze it, because there is a human and many variables, elements to these things. And yes, then you could say, but then doesn't that mean that you have to accept some calls are going to be made bad? But then when you look at the underlying reasons for that, and people have always talked about the fact that we have volunteer stewards when we should have just like a core team of stewards that are paid and are almost, trained in this and, bearers of knowledge and talk to the drivers and others to build knowledge, to build their own kind of committee that they, change and base off of, rather than having a changing squad and having quote unquote irrelevant people there that are just like track owners or something. And, there are other fixes there rather than just saying, we're going to fix it by applying black and white, because it's motor racing. There's a human element. There's so many elements that you can't,
You want to know where I heard you talking about this exact thing about how we need to have a set committee
at the end of last year?
Yes, the Abu Dhabi video that we recorded last year. You said exactly the same thing.
Because that's when I heard some people saying it, saying it was again the BBC team was saying this is what we need to avoid what happened at the end of last year.
They're not learning. They're putting in like a couple of things and think, this will fix it, and they're not actually listening to drivers.
Or they're looking at one issue alone going, this fixes that. You go, but there's 10 others that are also in that bubble. You've addressed one, but there's 6 others that doesn't address. And one of them are probably going to come up again, which they do. And you see that it doesn't address that. So they go, we'll get rid of it then.
Yeah. And it's also this, like, the let's say those rules that have worked for, however many scenarios in the past. And then just because it's a little bit controversial because of the variance in how they judge from last year in particular, the variance in how they judge the collisions, they're like, oh no, we need a black and white rule now to get rid of that grey area. But it was based on collisions between like pretty much Max and Lewis throughout the year. And that's just because they were racing hard, and maybe, there was some variance. Sometimes the decisions were a little bit, probably the wrong decision, even though the rule basically gives them the right to swing it whichever way they want. It's still the wrong decision. I think the rule itself was fine. I just think it needed to be enforced better. They don't need to change the rule. Just enforce the rule that's there is better.
Yes.
Like to enforce
or change those who are enforcing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So like. That's I was going to talk about other disappointments, but I've obviously talked about that enough. That's obviously my biggest disappointment, because I just looking back on it and thinking about it, it's just like I just can't. Like, they've changed the wrong things, or they haven't changed things enough. It's just not going the right direction.
The one thing that they did change that I'm glad for is track limits. Is that at least they were consistent, almost saying, look, every corner, the white line. And we even saw some big moments in quality which might have gone, are they going to remove it? They're going to not, because it might impact. They said, no, flat rule, it's out,
Yep.
And I can at least give them credit that they stuck to that. Even some drivers were like, oh, but this seems a bit tweaky there. They went, no. That's the rule. And during the race, they were very, heavy on going warning 1, warning 2, black and white. And I think, I feel like it was Gasly once, maybe actually went over the limit, or a similar driver once or twice. Maybe Mick did once. Actually got a penalty for saying you've done it too many times, penalty, and they were just like, that's the rule. And yes, we saw a bit of driver politics going on with some drivers reporting each other and that.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's going to happen anyway in the heat of battle. And if anything, they added a bit of spice and a bit of humor to it, where they know they're playing for that and they're pushing the limits. And so I think the one thing that they actually got on top of, which was like one of the few problems they used to have, they're fixed, and now tons of others have come up. It's like, well, you're going to take 5 years to fix each of these like you did track limits, or can we get some more speed onto these items? You've done one. Get onto your next 50 to-do list, please.
Also, all right. Something else that reminded me. Remember the thing with the porpoising, and they were taking like, we're going to introduce these things and we're going to talk about them, introduce them, and it took them like 3 races to introduce it, and they just kept delaying it and delaying it and delaying it. It's like, why introduce them? Just introduce them now. You've done your tests. You know what you're doing.
Oh, and they actually pulled their thumb out of their bum and did introduce it. It was fine.
Exactly,
there was no issue. We didn't hear anything. In fact, it was rare for us to go, oh, look at that quick right-hander. There's a little bit of porpoising. Haven't seen that in a bit. And that, that was a big thing to go, oh, but in general, we don't see it that much anymore. So they finally did it, and it's like, great, look, ta-da! Why are you mucking around with this so long?
Yeah, that's my biggest disappointment. Just, they need to do better. They really, really, really do. I would almost argue that overall this year was worse than last year in terms of the decisions they made and the poor communication and all that. I genuinely think it is. I think last year was marred
over
by
the course of a season,
decision.
And I even, that's what I said at our season review. I said in general, I thought apart from that and a few calls, which even then you could argue, like the Brazil thing, I even thought you could argue it. It generally I thought was policed pretty well. And then this year in comparison, you just go, God, I'll almost take in Abu Dhabi if we get the rest of the year police better than this.
Yeah. Thank you for your question, Michaela. We'll get on to this one from Sam. Crosso Dog, and he asked, do you think if we get Max v Lewis again next year, if it'll be any different? Kind of a vague question.
It's different to last year. No, it would be just as spicy, if not spicier.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, even if they came together at Brazil and you saw them both race, how they wouldn't race anyone else through there, their comments afterwards seem to still be pretty, it's just Max doing Max things. Oh, it's just Lewis doing Lewis things. You go, 100% they would start smacking horns immediately.
Yeah. The argument is like, now that Max has his first championship, maybe he won't fight it as hard, maybe...
Yes.
I don't see that. I see Max being as feisty as ever. I think Lewis, despite all his comments otherwise, I think he still wants that 8th world championship.
He's going to be even more charged up if he has a chance, given his year this year. This is all just been charging his batteries, So
100%. If it ends up being a Max v Lewis at the top again, it would be just as charged as 2021, 100%.
And imagining a Max v Lewis with people like Russell in there and potentially the Ferraris as well, and Sainz would be oof.
Now this is a question I wanted to ask you, given a recent conversation we had. This is from Voleray, Volley, and he asked a couple of things, but the first part is, in your humble opinion, of all drivers, why did Haas settle for Hulkenberg? And I know because you were talking about how you really like Hulkenberg and Magnussen. You're like, oh, maybe I'll go for Haas next year.
Because Hulk and Perez were the dream team, the Force India golden years when I first got into them and followed them. And yes, I like drivers like Sutil that drove for them and similar, but still Perez, Hulkenberg, and in their what was it, Fourth India they used to be called, and Field of Fourth and everything.
Yeah,
they were the fourth best team consistently.
Yep.
When I really got into them. So they were the dream team. In all honesty, they just, it's consistency. They say that Magnussen through the year was consistent enough for where they're at. And they were like, great job. Yes, you had some ups, but even without those ups, he was consistent enough. Mick was not and not at all and consistent enough. He had a few big highs, but they want consistency, because as we just discussed for most of this, consistency is bloody key when it's this close.
Yeah.
You look at someone like Bottas. Yes, he finished weak near the end. He was consistent enough that you don't look down on him, or even someone like Zhao, or someone like Ocon, consistent enough. So they're going for Hulk because they think he will be a consistent amount of hands. I guess he's a bit of an unknown quantity in that he's only done a few one-off races. His fitness still has to get there, but
I mean, you see Magnussen, and he came in start of the year having...
Well, and he was still actively racing in that, to be credit, while Hulk has, been on the side, been more commentating, chilling at home and that. But in interviews with Gunther Steiner, he says that as soon as there was any word that Haas had a seat available, apparently Hulk was like calling him daily, saying, is there an inkling? Is there an inkling? Because they didn't need to go to him to say, hey, do you want to go in the pool? Or even his manager was saying, no, it was Hulk saying to him every day, hey, So clearly he's keen for it, which shows his ambition, if he needs to get fit and all that, which he will, no issue. But they want someone to be consistent. I guess they look at the options, and not only consistency, but it seems like they really care about also having someone that they really think will develop the car well. I think because Haas had those few years where they were really struggling, and now with the cost cap, they've got a healthy cash flow. Gene Haas is very happy. They've obviously got good people in their team. They're thinking, look, even if K-Mag is a super consistent one, we've got someone supporting him. We also just need two guys that aren't going to bin it. They're going to get us lots of data, that are really knowledgeable, experienced in lots of teams. Hulk is, reserve driver for tons of teams, be all over the shop in the behind the scenes, a very clever, smart guy. And that's why they're saying, look, he's the perfect fit for us. We could go with another junior, which could potentially get them more points, but I think they're saying that's not what we really need. Money isn't really a concern because of the cost cap. They've got good flow enough coming from the FIA and F1 with the championship order, so they can even sacrifice some of that potential, unloan for a Spark, a new talent, a Deruval or something, right? Because they just want a safe, knowledgeable pair of hands.
I guess
for that consistency.
I think one of the biggest things you mentioned as well is given where they were last year, now that they're sort of on the up and they have pace again and they have a real chance to be, right in that mid pack, or even at the start of the year they were almost top of the mid pack at a lot of the time. Having that extra data, being able to develop the car to be able to keep ahead rather than falling back like they kind of did towards the end, it felt like. Having the consistent finishes, the proper feedback from these, experienced drivers that have been around F1 for ages. They probably found that this year with Magnussen, that, actually his feedback is considerably pushing us in the direction we need to go compared to Schumacher's. And they're like, okay, we need that right now. And maybe only comes back for a year or two, and then they move on to someone if they get what they need. Maybe that's all he comes back for. But I do think that's probably the biggest thing is, now that they are not the absolute disaster fire they were last year, and they actually
just hanging on and just have drivers to pay the bills and just to run around, right? Make up the numbers. Yeah,
maybe they can come back to some kind of form that they showed when they first entered the sport, and they've seen that, and they're like, we need this, and we need to harness it as quickly as possible. So when Mick comes back saying, I really need 3 seasons in F1, and while I think for the most part I'd agree, it's obviously something that Haas doesn't need right now. So
and it's a different time in F1 we've had previously. There's less of that area where you can kind of you can brood in that, and I think almost just stepping back in that concept a bit, I think that's why Bottas and Alpha seem to get along so well. And I think that's why Alpha often throw Kubica out in that car for a lot of sessions. Because they actually say that, him, for his knowledge and development of the car, is apparently extremely good. And, we see some guys running young rookies because they have to. And then you see someone like Kubica out there. You go, well, they're not actually running him because he's a rookie. They're running him because he brings that much insight. And they've had him for a number of years now, and they still continue to sign him. Similar for this reason that Haas looking for someone like Hulk. Now, why they wouldn't take someone like Ricciardo? Well, from what I hear, Ricciardo wasn't that keen, wasn't really talking about it. And if you've got one guy saying, look, I'm really keen for this, I want to go into it, you'd think Haas wants someone who really wants it, who wants to, join the team and not just go, I've got no option, I've got to go back to you guys now. They, they want someone who really wants to be there, and, they think is a safe pair of hands. I've got one guy checked off in Magnussen. And again, you have an unknown quantity with a rookie. So, and I think that's why for teams like AlphaTauri almost have a bit of a question mark because you feel like Tsunoda's another driver which it's hard to say because of the car, but you almost like he's done a bit better than Mick, which is why he's there. But really, their strong driver that was their development driver of Gasly, which is leaving now. And it leaves a bit of a question mark going, well, yes, they've got two kind of young guns now, but when the winning formula for these middle teams seems to be having, a strong leader that's both consistent and has that knowledge to develop, this is it's a bit of a question mark. I think Haas went, we don't really want to take that risk and do similar to what they're doing. We're going to do our own thing here. And but they almost tried that a few years ago. That's why they had Kev and they had Grosjean, but it seemed like that wasn't the era to have that. You really needed a driver who had its peaks on its day, who could smash it out there, because normally everyone's running at the back and dilling around, and you've got to get that sudden 4th, 5th position for that once-off, victory to get your points. When now it's like, no, it's consistency. It's not a kid who's going to smash out there his day and then dawdle at the back. Someone like you feel like a Yuki sometimes does now and then. So I think that's my reason why I think Haas signed them, and it casts a dark cloud, I think, over someone like AlphaTauri, who seemed to be the one going in the. Yeah, go on.
Well, the one thing I wanted to, now that you mentioned that, I think Nick de Vries has obviously worked with a few teams now. He's obviously been behind the scenes with Williams and Mercedes, and he's driven for Aston, I think. I think he was a
yes, he's known apparently for driving like 7 different cars in the past 2 years or something.
So he's driven quite a few different cars. Yes, he obviously had his debut in a Williams, which is, as we've mentioned, probably the worst car on the grid, and he scored the same amount of points as Latifi in one race. So
and it wasn't just out of luck; it was out of a decent bit of talent.
He was actually quite good. So I think that possibly will help them. Possibly, I don't know how he actually works behind the scenes, but I figure the fact that he's got connections with all these teams, he obviously brings something enough. Whether it is just his pace or whether he actually has good comments to those those teams from those sessions. I think there is potential there with Nick de Vries. I think I'd be very curious to see how he goes and how that team develops next year for sure. Because I think it's an interesting story.
He could be a hand. You're right. That will be consistent. I guess it's a matter of also where we've seen that card trend and saying you almost need a really good driver to help to develop in the right direction as well. With you only get so many changes now with the cost cap, and a lot of changes you can make a minor. That I think like that experience of just being in many race weekends in the past is what is causing a lot of teams to get that consistency. So it'll be interesting. Or maybe they strike a blinder and maybe that's the winning formula, and maybe they randomly get 3 podiums and no other points, and yet that's enough for them. I don't know, but it's interesting. But that's why long-winded answer. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yes.
Or you could think it's complete crap and I'm off my meds or something. But
I've actually just cut all of it. Sorry, so it's only 30 seconds long. So yeah.
Well, I also say a bit of that because I just listened to 2 recent podcasts that had Gunther Steiner as a guest star as well after the season ended. So
you have a lot
both of those I've got a lot of info flowing as well from what he said about Hulk, and that's I've gone, that's a good point. I'll remember that, carry it on to this.
Cool.
So
there you go. But yeah, Volley, the second part of his question, again similar to Michaela's, asked for top 3 races, worst 3 races, driver of the season, or again maybe a top 3, bottom 3. Assuming these aren't already planned for future podcasts, they are. So
we touched a bit on them, but we'll dive into it more when we are next chat.
So and the last set is from Noops, and Noops gave us rather than questions, just gave us a bunch of like real hot take opinions, and they're pretty good. They're pretty good. You'll enjoy these, but thank you, Noops. Gave us about 3 or 4. So first one. Ferrari bottling a championship lead isn't as bad as it seems on the surface. They have an opportunity to develop the reliability issues out of the power unit after the engine freeze. Not sure if Fred Vasseur is the right choice to replace Binotto or if he should go at all, but it is true that the fish rots from the head. But he may be an unfortunate casualty of the desire to appease Leclerc, which will be a sliding doors moment 5 years from now. So yeah, he seems to think that Ferrari bottling the championship lead isn't as bad as it seems, and maybe they'll get rid of. There is a lot of talk about Binotto potentially going.
There is a lot of rumors about him being replaced. About apparently he and Leclerc haven't been on speaking terms for some time. Not that I want to plead the fifth, but I truly don't
I don't know enough.
have enough info or even just expertise to really make a call on this, because you're looking at it in a vacuum. This is Ferrari's best year in some time. I mean, yes, you'd say even the Vettel years when he was up there in
17, 18, I think it was.
17, 18 and such. But then even then you could argue, well, did they bottle that? Was that more the driver? Was that team calls and such? And again, but then you just have to look at the most recent years, and yes, this is a massive step, and there was a lot of question marks around signing Leclerc, and he took it to Vettel, and now he's led the team when he's given it, and that was part of one of Bonotto's first decisions and all that. So again, and even when I just rely on others' opinions from that I listen to on podcasts and such, and even then they seem a bit kind of unsure, and it's like, look, it is a big decision. No one's really saying clear cut, no, keep him there, he's done so well. It generally has been the Ferrari way to say, look, it's not working, after a few years, kick him out, get someone else in. Sometimes that hasn't worked.
That's what
exactly.
They did with him. Yeah.
Sometimes that hasn't worked. Sometimes it has worked. So maybe do you keep doing that? Maybe it's an Italian thing. It's politics. It's hard to say. I think it was a big fall from grace. And I think it would have been an even bigger fall if you remember, like even when we were getting in the first few races and even in, I think it was Spain, and Leclerc was so far ahead even at that point when he had his issues and that, and there would have been even more of a lead, and maybe that's what messed it up. You don't know. Maybe they did switch super duper early, and they're going to come out next year and they're actually going to crack it in the balls because they went after race 12. We got to make a big decision here. We don't know that, right? Ferrari often are quite conserved and they leave things behind the table, and there's often been all sorts of rumors. How many rumors have we had about Ferrari saying we're going to pull out, we're not doing this, and all of those were a bunch of baloney, right?
Yeah.
So, not that I want to plead the fifth. I agree that something big could happen, and I wouldn't be surprised. Frederick Vasseur, I think he would be an actually really outside pick for that team, but I feel like he's so invested almost in the Sauber project and where that's going with Audi. I feel like he himself probably isn't going to want to leave that, because he's built quite a decent team now compared to a team we used to see right at the back as the 20th, 21st, only ahead of Manor and Rouge on the grid, right?
Yeah.
And I almost feel like it would almost be a shame to see him move away from that, because I want to see what that turns into with Audi coming in soon with them.
Yeah, very true. Very, very true. Yeah, and I think they've got a pretty strong driver lineup as well, with Bottas obviously proving that he is still a good racer. And Zhou, I think he had...
he could be a hidden talent still.
I think he a little bit unlucky. I think he drove a lot better than his points maybe suggest. Quite unlucky. Quite a lot of reliability issues, particularly with their gearbox early on. And I think when Alfa Romeo were the strongest was the start of the year, which was the first few races for Zhou. So you can't really judge him on that. He started to come to his own sort of, maybe mid-season, and he was starting to be a bit more consistent. But by then, sort of Alpha had dropped back a little bit, and they couldn't really get those consistent performances outside of Bottas just driving the pants off the car. So,
but you still see the potential. That's the thing. You still see that that comment I made. You get the right drivers, the right team and people in place, and it's there. You don't go, they're at the back because they just need another year to reset. You go, they've just got to get it a bit together. But I guess back around to the actual question. Yeah. What are your thoughts? Do you have a stab in the dark that you think's gonna happen, or are you
similar boat to you? I've got absolutely no idea what's gonna happen. I do think that some of the comments that Binotto, particularly mid-season when everything started to fall apart, and he basically just came out and said, "Yeah, it's okay, everything's fine." Yes. It's like, I obviously paraphrasing, I don't know exactly what he said, but some of the comments he was talking about, and it's just like, mate, you have to acknowledge.
He was almost just trying to brush it off, and you go, this shouldn't be something you're brushing off as the team principal.
Yeah, exactly.
Christian Horner then was very much like, this is really bad, but we're going to fight tooth and nail to fix it. Yeah. But I wasn't going, we've identified it, we're going to get back up there, we're confident. He's just like, it's happening, but it's a big C. You just go, where's the confidence in your team and drivers? This is, I don't know. I don't know what to think.
No idea.
Should I be concerned?
Yeah. The one thing I kind of do agree with is the fact that more so than Ferrari clowning strategies, I think their reliability issues are a bigger problem as a whole, because that took them out of like a lot of points, and that nearly lost lost them to Mercedes as well. Like you think back to I wrote them down because there was a real string of races where everything just turned. We had Spain. They had the power unit failure of Leclerc. Monaco was the really bad strategy call that put Leclerc in. Was it fourth in the end?
Oh Lord, yeah.
The really bad one. Double
the
stacks,
change from wet to dry and how badly they handled it and lost everything.
Then following race, they had the Baku double power unit failure where both cars went out with power unit failures. They didn't pit Charles during the safety car at the end of the British Grand Prix, and this is a race where Max had damage and he was not going to score a lot of points, and they're like, they could have capitalized with a lot of points. Sainz ended up winning, so Ferrari had pace. They decided not to pit Charles, and he was just a sitting duck for the last 10-15 laps. Ended up dropping back to like 5th or 6th or something. Sainz had his catastrophic power unit failure in Austria, where it like melted the side pod. It was just so many power unit failures. Like, it was a big issue, particularly in that mid phase of mid phase of the season.
And you feel like that should have made a big media frenzy and a lot of comments, and again, they just seem to brush it off, and that doesn't instill confidence, I guess, as a viewer in the fans that they actually know what they're doing. Like, if they lucked into this season now, they're just going, oh, well, yeah, we'll sort it out. I don't know.
Yeah. So we'll have to see. I mean, I think if they can develop the reliability issues out, as Noops is saying, I think they stand a much better chance. Possibly even morale will go up because they're not retiring as much.
And you'll be shocked if we went into next year and they'd fallen back. You still get the vibe that they're up there and they changed early and such. But I wouldn't be surprised to see a change. That's all I'm saying. If they do change, I'll be like, okay. If they don't, I'll be like, yep, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'm about 50-50 on it. Like I said, I can see both. I'm maybe erring on the side that they possibly won't change. But again, I don't actually know. I don't know. They do what they want. Ferrari.
They're not paid enough.
Yeah.
to make that call.
Yeah. Go watch like actual analysts or something.
Yeah.
All right. Second one from Noops. His second opinion: Verstappen will be at least a 3-time world champion, but the fight will be more like 2021 and may not be sequential, depending on the gains made by Ferrari and Mercedes in the off-season. So he seems to think Verstappen will at least get one more world championship, but it might not be 3 in a row. So, which, I guess is fair. I would probably agree with that. I think he's probably favourite for next year as well, given what happened this year. I don't know if you have any comments on that, but
yeah. I normally go first. I was letting you see if you wanted to chat first about it. That was all.
I don't really have many other comments on it.
I was going to keep it. Yeah, I was going to keep it pretty brief. I agree. Third, 100% at some point. I mean, again, there could be some left-wing disaster, but given the trend that F1 is evolving and such, it seems a lot harder to have big swings and hits and misses. So even if it's not next year, the year after, he's still bloody young and all that. And yes, you go, but Vettel never got his next title. But you go, yeah, but he kind of threw it away, and I just don't see Max in that similar position to Vettel throwing something away like he did. So 100% in the future.
Whether or not it's going to be more like 2021,
that's
I don't
what I was going to say.
know.
Do you think this will be his most ever dominant win? I'd put money on it to say yes. I think this will be. This is the first year of the new regs, and especially when reliability is so high. Generally, after the first year, disregarding Renault, I suppose, in their time, you see reliability improve through the same regs rather than going backwards.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, even though we've got more races, and I don't think it'll be his. I think this will be his most dominant that he will have, but he 100% will have one, if not more, in the future.
Yeah. I'd probably back him to win it next year. Again, we'll get into.
If you had to put money down now, of course. Yeah. I don't know why you need some hook, line, sinker. Mystery background clue to pin it on someone else, other than just being a fan of someone.
Yeah,
but
that's it. We'll get into that again. We'll do our 2023 season predictions as it gets closer and things start to happen. And maybe we'll change our opinion, but. Yeah, I do think it'll be more like... I do think Max will probably win it next year as of right now. I hope it's more like 2021, but I hope it's more like 2021 in the sense that we have the 3 teams like we talked about. I just want 3 teams close together. I want six drivers all in the running to win any of the races, and they have to really be on it, or maybe it comes down to track characteristics or car characteristics, and they're faster at these types of tracks, or they're faster in the slower corners, which is again what we sort of had from Ferrari Red Bull at the start of the year, where Ferrari were really, really quick over one lap, and then Red Bull would set up for the race, or
yes, of course,
it's all about finding that balance, but they're close enough that they have to find the balance that works for them, that gives them the edge. And that's what I think.
As the cars mature, you get a bit more of that as well, of course, as they lock in and go, yes, for the next 5 years, this is the right philosophy. Let's drill down deeper into it.
Yeah. So we'll see. But yeah, I think Max easily at least 3. I think this era of until 2025, I think there's a very good chance it could be like a Lewis of the turbo hybrid era kind of thing if Red Bull keep the form. He's an incredible driver, and there's a very good chance he could just win all of them in this era. So, but we'll see. Next one from Noops. This one's a good one. This one's a really good one. George Russell will be the leading Mercedes driver going into the mid-year break next year, and soon after, end of the year or year after, Lewis Hamilton will either retire or move teams. Norris will be headhunted for the Mercedes seat and will be a disappointment a la Ricciardo at McLaren.
So it really, if the Mercedes is competitive, Hamilton's going to be back up there 100%.
Yep.
I don't have any doubts that I think the car would have to be worse next year than it was this year.
Yeah.
Then Lewis might start saying to go, look, I'm not seeing much sunshine here, because I guess if the whole promise this year is saying this is a training ground for us, this has been a good year for experience fighting, this type of battle in the bottom of the top half, or top. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Top bracket.
Top bracket. Yeah. Top part of the grid. But they're still not, enjoying the same success that they almost have been since he joined that team, other than maybe his first year, right? And even then, he had a win in his first year. So anyway, so I think if the car next year is actually worse, then I could see it being teased. I think that's heavily unlikely. And I think, based on what they've gone through this year, I think both of them will be very competitive, and both of them will have their days, but it'll either be extremely close or Lewis will be ahead. I would put my money on leading into the middle break.
Counterpoint, Russell was already beat Hamilton this year, and while we see that maybe they're a lot closer on pace than the points suggest, people you can look at the points and the standings and say, oh, Russell's faster than Hamilton. It doesn't really work like that if you've watched throughout the season. But this is his first year at Mercedes. He's only going to get better. What if he does end up being consistently better than Hamilton, particularly if they are fighting at the top?
I think they'll need to almost design the car around him for that to happen. I feel like this is what people. I'm just going to say it, 'cause I think, why not? I think this is where people are mostly getting baited into the same they did for Sainz v Leclerc. We're going to this year, almost everyone's like, but why do you think...
Because I was going to bring it up.
Why do you think Leclerc's going to be? And we go, no, because when it comes push knife to shove, he's just going to have that
extra edge,
right? It's the same when it came to Vettel and Webber, and on their, whatever day they were kind of similar, but then on the edge day, Vettel was up there. And we saw this year that when it really came to it, Leclerc just found that extra pace out of bloody nowhere, despite never having fought at this level before. And even Max last year found all of this level, right? And I think this is similar, where Lewis, when he doesn't really have to push it, he's similar to these other drivers, where he won't, right? And yet, I feel like if they do have a car that's up there, that, although I think they'll be very close, and it shouldn't be underrated that Russell's strategy crew earlier this year made many calls that were insanely good, that got him podiums and great results, that, yes, he still had to be in a position to get them, but his strategy team were on it, more than Hamilton's team was. Hamilton's side still did fine, but especially for Russell. I mean, I know they're both managed by the same kind of team, but I just know Russell in particular they just had a package, just managed it all perfectly. But I think when push comes to shove and you're less looking for, a lucky break to get an undercut in, you're more looking just for pure performance. When you're at that high level pressure edge, I don't see any reason why it still won't be Hamilton that's ahead of him when it really comes to that. And I think now he's craving that more than ever, especially. So if he gets that, which I think is a good chance that he will, even maybe if it's not for the top spot, but at least to be closer than he was this year, I don't see any reason why not. I mean, we can still tease the second question that was made, but if you had any more thoughts on
Yeah.
Hamilton Russell
Not
next
really.
year.
I was going to bring up the Leclerc Sainz thing mainly because everyone was hyping that up and we were right. Oh,
Yes.
just saying, we were
Our
right.
server predictions, you'll see. We can
Yeah.
go back to when they revealed them. They said, "Oh, Mart and Nico,
yeah.
I'm curious why you think this. Everyone's voted against you." And I
Yeah.
just went, "I don't know. This is pretty clear to me." And straight up happened.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We got one right. Yeah,
We're still at the bottom of the standings out of everyone in that server.
yeah. Oh, well. Yeah, I mean, the counterpoint you obviously brought up, Sainz and Leclerc and Vettel, Webber. I'd probably rate Russell a little higher than the counterparts, like the Sainz and the Vettel, the Sainz and the Webber.
Agree,
sorry,
yeah.
I think that George Russell has the potential to be a lot stronger than those. To be a lot closer to someone like a Lewis than they were. So yeah, I am more...
I agree. The gap will be a lot shorter.
Yes,
yeah, the gap in those other two pairings was big on its day, right? I don't suggest it'll be like this, but again, I think that he's one of those drivers that will save a bit more in the tank as these other guys have, and he'll show it when it's presented to him that it's a good time for him to show his talent and skill that he's still 100% has. I don't think he's off his game at all. No. Don't doubt that for a second.
Yeah, I don't think Norris will be headhunted for a Mercedes seat.
He's at a team which are happy to build the car around him, and that can't be said enough, and that's why he's so comfortable. And I think that also means there's a chance if he did move team to someone like Mercedes, I think there is an unknown quality where, yes, we see him so blindingly quick and consistent, but it's because he's with a car that he's really, really comfortable with. You look at someone like Ricciardo, who used to be with a car he was comfortable with, moves to one he's not, and it's struggle city, right? And I think this is very similar. Like, we have drivers like, I think to some degree, Verstappen, who said this year he started with a car that he actually was really, really uncomfortable with. And yes, they've moved it more to his style now, potentially to the detriment of some comments from Sergio going, hey, we're moving away to one driver again. Can we not do this? We're a two-car team here, right? Yes. But still, he still started with a car he wasn't comfortable with. And I remember at the start of the year, we saw that Leclerc was apparently driving a Ferrari that was like a complete opposite of how he had to drive the car last year. And yet he just found a way to drive it. I think Lando's an unknown quality where maybe if you did throw him in like a Ferrari or Mercedes, I have no idea. I think it could actually turn out, it could be a bit turn up and need it to move to his style. I think that's why he wouldn't leave McLaren even if they're struggling a little bit. He's still very young and they're absolutely happy to build the car around him. Yes, they're getting a young guy in, but that's not to replace him. That's to be a backup and to say, let's get these two guys going, forward into the future together to build us into hopefully a top team again, which I think is the right way to do it for them. So I think there is a genuine, I wouldn't have confidence to say throw him in a car like Leclerc, throw him in any car. I think he'll get there. I think same for Verstappen. I think they're probably the two I think would be the best at it. But again, I would they head punch him? I think they'd try, but I think he and McLaren will go, longer term, no. I think we will, again, similar to the Vasseur thing, I think they'd want to see it out. I think they're building something amazing together. Neither party really want to drop unless, they were throwing billions at them or some other reason, right?
Yeah, I think it probably doesn't help Norris. Again, you say unknown. It's an unknown because he's only ever been at one team as well. He's driven one car, and that's the McLaren. He hasn't driven anything else.
And he drives it very well.
Yeah, exactly.
But we don't know how he drives something else.
Exactly. So he could jump. He could be just really good at driving this car, but then he gets in another car, and it's like, oh, this is entirely different. I don't know how to do this. And he ends up being like the Ricciardo for that team, because it's just like, I can't get a handle on it.
Or even just another one like a Bottas or a bit slower than that, when we'd expect him to be a Hamilton replacement, and it's totally an unknown, right?
For sure. So, yeah, I think he's happy at McLaren for the time being, and hopefully he pushes that team forward anyway, because it would be good to see them up there a bit more. I think they probably deserve to be, but anyway, final one from Noops. Is somewhat related. Piastri will be an unmitigated disaster for the opening half of the season before getting a shock podium in the second half. McLaren will cling to him tightly regardless. Ricciardo will get another full-time seat, possibly Aston Martin after they break Alonso like they did Seb. That's an interesting one. So he'll get another full-time seat when Aston Martin break Alonso like they did Seb.
An example is where
okay,
they could find a slot.
Yeah, okay. So, I guess the first part,
Break it
Piastri
down.
will be an unmitigated disaster for the first half of the season before getting a shock podium in the second half. I don't know. I don't know with Piastri. I don't know.
If it did happen, I honestly wouldn't necessarily be surprised. I mean, yeah, it's hard to say. He's certainly a rookie coming through that's being placed in a position like this. That's probably the biggest rookie launch since Norris, I guess, started. I mean, like when Van Dorn started at McLaren was a big thing as well, and that turned into shambles, both because the car and the driver was a bit of a piss take, right? Like maybe Magnussen when he started at McLaren was pretty big, and
that's probably before my
but
time.
But again, this is pretty. Yeah, this is pretty. That was prime Force India days. That's why I remember that season very well. It was the Schlong season. That was when he joined them. Anyway, on topic. I think it's pretty big, both the controversy surrounding it, and I think at a time when a lot of teams don't seem to be making big plays that are near the top. You know, like a Russell move was pretty solid. A Checo move still seemed to be pretty logical. A Sainz to Ferrari still seemed pretty logical, and yet, or even an Ocon to an Alpine or an Alonso to an Aston Martin, all logical choices, but this is pretty left field, right?
Yeah.
So it's a lot of pressure. I mean, we've been following him for a while now, which I guess is why we, obviously know there's some talent there. He has had a year on the sidelines. Yes, he's been behind the scenes, but that still adds more of an unknown quantity to it. It's really hard to say. Yeah. I don't think we're going... Like, admittedly, when Zhao joined, I think we both said we think he's going to struggle a fair bit. I don't see that same thing with Piastri. Oh, it's hard. I can see him really struggling and clicking halfway through, and then he gets to keep the seat, right? I think there'll be some allowance if he struggles. I don't think it'll be like, 3 races in, you haven't scored a point, buddy. Bye-bye, we're getting someone else back in.
Well, considering how long they held on to Daniel for, tried to make that
for how
work.
much they were paying,
Yeah,
so
I think it shows
and
that
I think a great environment for someone like him who is struggling, if he is struggling. But whether he is or not, it's impossible. It's impossible to say. I don't think he'll beat Norris. I don't think he'll come out that strong. I don't think he's that... Like, he hasn't had the rookie season of the gods, and he's beaten some massive young names that we know he's going to smash it out, right? He'd have a drive last year if that was the case, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's an exciting factor, though. Like, God, well, it's yeah.
It is. It's like he's obviously been hyped to such a point that unless he does absolutely outstanding, I think people are going to be disappointed. Given... Particularly, I think...
From an outside view and from a general news point of view, I agree.
From an Australian's point of view, given he's replacing Ricciardo as well, unless he does
the golden boy.
Considerably better than Ricciardo, Australians aren't going to be happy. We will go into it with more of an open mind because...
yes, people who I think know F1,
but yeah, so but it is hard to say. Yeah, I don't know. Again, going back to that previous point about how the fact that McLaren car it's designed around Norris as well, is Piastri one of those drivers who's going to be able to pick that up and be like, okay, this isn't normally my kind of style of car, but I can pick it up. Unlike Daniel, who obviously couldn't quite manage that one. So,
and maybe because Daniel had previously had a style of F1 and Piastri doesn't, but then it depends how you can mold him. Some rookies, like George, who seemed to jump from Williams to Mercedes and gunned it, seemed to do well. De Vries drives all sorts of stuff and seems to, be able to adapt to it. We don't know if he's a driver that can adapt to it. It's a bit of a question mark.
Yeah, exactly.
I wouldn't be surprised what happens, to be honest. That storyline could happen, and I go, yep, that's Piastri,
yeah. Yep.
So
shock podium in the second half could happen. Depends.
I could see him doing it.
I feel like I'm going based off the podiums from this year though, where Norris is the only other one to get a podium. So if it's,
I know, yeah,
that's
assuming it's going to be a season. I think where maybe we see a bit more. Maybe that's wishful thinking. A bit more hero performances like last year.
I think if it's similar to last year in the fact that some of those other teams can sort of throw it up onto the podium. If it's more like 2021 in that regard, I could see it happening. If it's more like this year, possibly not.
No, Norris far more likely to get one again.
Almost certainly it'd be Norris out of those two drivers, I would think. Yeah. So. And I guess second part of the question, Ricciardo will get another full-time seat, probably Aston Martin after they break Alonso like they did Seb, which is a bold
I do
claim.
Like that comment, yeah. I know what his intentions are, but again, you look at where it's supposed to open up, and you think, like, is he looking in 2 years' time, maybe?
Yeah.
Like, next year, I think we talked about this even the previous year when we were talking about where's he going to fit heading into next year.
Yeah.
Similar other drivers we said, where are they going to fit? I think we said if someone like Vettel decides he wants to move on, it's almost impossible to move on somewhere else.
Yep.
And,
that's why he didn't move on anywhere else. He moved on back to his house. Yeah.
Yes, and you feel like if Ricciardo did want to stay on the grid, genuinely, he did have options.
He did have an option. He had the Haas,
and
yeah.
yet, yes, or even a Williams if he wanted, or something. There was plenty of potential options there, and yet he just seemed pretty stagnant not to take it. And yet he's saying, "Oh, but full sights on the future." You go, but what's in the future?
Yeah.
It's going to be the same case as this year. So if you didn't take it this year, what are you looking for the following? I think in the role that he is chasing, I think he's going to do a great job in that. And I think he'll enjoy it.
Yeah,
but I think he should set his sights on jumping into something else rather than chasing this dream. I mean, I'd say similar. I think to Mick said a similar thing, which I think is even less likely. I don't know what he's looking for to jump back into.
Sorry, Mick.
Unless he, I don't know. Maybe Ricciardo's waiting out for the Andretti driver. Ooh. I don't know. Maybe he'll be a pickup there.
Yeah.
Ricciardo and Mick for Andretti in 2026.
No, they're going to have a fucking American driver in there.
Yes. So. Well, hey, Ricciardo, he's basically American now, isn't he?
Yeah.
He loves it.
It's kind of true, actually. Yeah. Just put on an accent.
So I think even if he does go somewhere, it'll almost be like, really? Like,
yeah, I'd be surprised. I mean, even if we're talking about Aston, like, obviously Aston have Alonso for 2 years. The reason why Alonso went to Aston Martin is because they gave him a 2-year contract, whereas Alpine were only giving him a 1-year contract. It's the reason why he went to Aston, so it seems very unlikely unless he gets, like, absolutely shafted there, that he would choose to leave. He's going to stay out those 2 years. By the end of those 2 years, Ricciardo's going to be, 35? So he could come back for, like, a year or two, maybe. Maybe he could try and go the Alonso, the Hamilton, just kind of stay on, the Kimi Räikkönen, and just stay on for longer years than maybe you would expect. But I would be more looking at, someone like Aston Martin. They've got Felipe Drugovich in as their reserve driver now and part of their driving program.
I would agree. I think more likely to see him in 2 years in there.
Absolutely more likely to see someone like Drugovich in there.
Or a new rookie or someone else that's moving around. I don't see what circumstances. Yes, it could happen, but still you'd need I can't think of one. Like, what's he going to prove behind the scenes? I don't like. It's not like a case like Albon, which was ditched, but then you think of the circumstances it was in. You still said there was some untapped potential. It's a driving to the end of his career. He's not doing like a Kimi where he's kind of retiring still on decent performance, then coming back, or like an Alonso, or I feel someone else did it and I've forgotten, but even a kind of a Magnussen, which still had a bit of untapped. This kind of path he's gone down. This almost seems like almost like a logical conclusion. Like he's concluded it now. There's no way to he either could have kept going if he wanted to. Obviously his heart and mind and soul wasn't in it. And that's it now. It's like he's not set himself up to be someone who is appropriate to have that return. I think that's why more people are saying we're more likely to see Vettel to return on the grid than Ricciardo. Which I probably agree with, to be honest with you.
I'd agree as well. It is a shame, but I think even possibly in some of the predictions I made last year, I was talking about how, like, if Ricciardo, if he's not racing for McLaren, I don't think he races in F1. Like, I stand by that. I think he might maybe luck out and get a drive in the Red Bull if something miraculous happens and either Max or Perez can't race. But then do they give it to him or do they give it to Lawson? It depends on the circumstances. Do they want to throw Lawson in the car? Are they that far ahead of the championship that's like, oh, we can afford to do this? Or is it really close and we need someone who's a known quantity? Or, that'd be the only time I could see him potentially in a Formula One drive again, outside of like FP1 sessions and all that. So,
yes,
it's a shame, but I'd be very, very happy to be proven otherwise. But
I did like the I don't know if it was fake or not. I didn't fact check it, but I saw a screen cap of I don't know who it was, but was it a quote official account or not, tweeting at the Las Vegas Grand Prix saying, "Can we have like a third Red Bull car just for Ricciardo to race?"
He would like the Red Bull. He would like the Las Vegas race, wouldn't he? That's very
and I
Daniel.
think the Las Vegas track account was like adding the FAO or something, saying let's make this happen or something, which of course can't happen, but still, imagine having like Ricciardo back and like Vettel back for a once-off like appearance in
oh my god.
You could almost like for the Las Vegas race, you could almost see like a tiny bit going, someone asking a question going, is there a chance we can make it happen, you know?
Come on.
Someone in the FIA going, oh, do you see that? Can we put it on the whiteboard in a tiny little sticky note in the maybe pile?
Yeah. As it gets thrown on by all the other issues that they're eventually going to make.
Yes, exactly. That's what they focus on. There's all these issues. They go, hey, let's talk about a celebrity appearance at Las Vegas.
I think that was it. I don't think I have anything else. Thank you, Noops, for those progressively hotter and hotter takes. They were good.
Well, if we do anyway, we can address them in our coming content regardless.
Definitely.
So if anyone listening to this has enjoyed it and does want to ask something or go, hey, why'd you say this? What's that? Yeah. We'll talk about it in our as we continue to break up this season that happened.
Yes, stay tuned for our new videos, or if you're listening on Spotify, or we're on Apple Podcast. Apple Podcasts, we're on that now. Yay, we did it. Just at our Twitter at Final Sector YT. We'll always read those as well. But
presuming it's still there and Twitter's not dead, but
it's fine.
Give it a try anyway. We'll sense it. We'll find it out somehow.
Go to our MySpace page at that we've definitely got. Bebo.
One of those.
What are the other ones? LinkedIn.
MyHook.
Go to our LinkedIn. Thank you all for watching or listening, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.
Bye.